Hi, welcome to this video on comping and extending chords. That was the blues in E that was in the first video, but now it's got comping with 3-note voicings. So the concept here is to build on your shell voicing, which have the 3rd and the 7th, for example this one, which is E7. And then, depending on where we're playing, we can add a 3rd voice. Now, if we look at the B string, which is just above the top voice here, that seems to be the logical place to get an extension from. So the note that's really cool and it's very easy to play is F sharp, which is the 9, called natural 9, in the scale which we call Mixolydian. Now, not everything comes from the blues scale. The Mixolydian scale sounds like this. If you look in the folder for this video, you'll find all sorts of interesting information, PDFs and recordings. The 9 is the 2nd note in the scale. So why is it called a 9 and not a 2? Well, chords are built in thirds. They're stacks, they're like little towers. That's the 1, 3, 5, 7 arpeggio. And if you want to go further, the next one is the 9. And the next one would be the 11, and then the 13. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but let's look at this 9 chord we've got. This chord is so common in fusion and soul, and of course blues also. It's important that we know it. And the other thing is the rhythmic component. I was sticking to a riff for this comping. It was always the same in the shuffle groove, which is triplets. Sometimes when you're comping, you can stick on a pattern like this because it suits the music. And other times comping can be more loose, where you're not fixed to a certain pattern. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we've got to stay with our E7-9 voicing and just stay there. But here we can do a slide where we go up a half step and back down again. And when we go up to a half step, that can be seen as B7 flat 13. Here's the B, and that's our shell voicing, tritone. And then the added voice is a flat 13. It's just chromatic, the way it resolves. Then we continue with the E9 again. And this is called a sharp 9, also called the Hendrix chord. A sharp 9 is a very bluesy sound because that note is in the blues scale. Here's the blues scale. So you might say, well, why do we play the natural 9? Well, we're playing the natural 9 because it gives us a different sound. And it's interesting to have that contrast of the comping using a natural 9, but the soloist might be using a sharp 9. And you might say, well, doesn't that clash? Yes, it does clash, but it works because the chords are also played very short. There's a lot of space there, and it's also about the volume you play. If you're comping, you're not going to be the loudest person in the band, obviously. Your job as a comping instrument is to fit in with the rhythm section. In this case, it's bass and drums and the keyboard, and you don't want to be louder than them. If you follow this, it'll be okay for a soloist who is louder to play over your chords, as long as you're steady with it, meaning keeping to the pattern. In bar 5, our next chord is A13. Now, with the shell voicing, we just move down a half step to get our A7. And the available color or extension on the B string is F sharp. I mean, there are other colors available, but a flat 13, I don't think you'd want to play that. It doesn't sort of feel nice. You've got to support the soloist. And this sounds good. Or 13 is a mellow sound. It's also a color from the Mixolydian scale. So the 13 is like the 6, the natural 6. In this position, it's convenient to play it. That's what we're looking for also. We don't want to break our hands. And then we go back to E9 in bar 7 and 8. And then we've got a B13, A13, and E9 again. And now B7 flat 13. The flat 13, we've already used it. It's got a bluesy sound too because it's using a G. But comping is all about finding what we call voice leading. And in this case, it's the top note. It has to go somewhere, which means also that it may be, sometimes it'll stay on the same note for a while, because otherwise it would be a bit nervous. So we look at possibilities that we've got to make a smooth, logical melody on our top notes. And if you find a nice, comfortable thing like that, then use it. That's a good thing to know. So the other thing which we have to do also is look in other positions. The PDF only has one example. How do we find other positions? Well, obviously we have to find our tritone. And it can't be too high. If we play it up here, we'll have the option of playing the E string. So I could play a 13, but it's too high. It's going to get in the way. We have to play lower down. What about this one? Sometimes an open string is part of our shell voicing, just by chance. So D is an open string, and G sharp is on the first fret. So what's our extension then on the B string? Well, it's a 13. The question is, what do we do when we have to go to A7? Because we can't slide down. There is no open C sharp string. So that's the problem if we use this voicing. But it's still good to know it. You could transfer everything to another string group. String groups can be either 3 or 4 strings on adjacent strings. So far we've been playing on a 3-string group. That could be transferred to a lower string group, then you get this. It's quite low, but it still works. And the option, the extension, would be available on the G string. That would be a 13. Sounds good sometimes to play in a lower register rather than this. Okay, and A7, as always, we slide the tritone down. And our extension could be a B. It's nice. So we've got E7, 13, A7, 9. And back. You can do this. In bar 4, you see the example has an E7 sharp 9, and that's about our voice leading, maybe an opportunity to do something a little different. So here we also have the opportunity to go from the 13 to the flat 13. And then slides down a half step, and then we have a A7-9. That's really nice. It's just, I found it's a general rule when learning chords and stuff, look at how many voices you've got, and if they're on adjacent strings, that's a string group. And therefore, if you've got a 3-note chord on 3 adjacent strings, that means there's going to be 4 groups of 3 where you could play it. Now, whether or not it will sound good is another question, but let's just look at it. Now, this is where we started. This is E7-9. So another string group where that could be played is the top 3 strings. Same notes. I've purposely not written this down. I think we've got to train our ears. So if you're playing this, split the notes up so that you can hear the intervals. Da, da, da. It needs practice to hit those notes accurately, and I've been a bit lazy with singing in the last years, so maybe I should practice it again. Then we try to find the same notes on another string group. So the tritone, that'll help us find it, because the tritone is such a strong sound and it always has this appearance like that, except for here where it's a little different. 9 on top is a major third. Good. A lot of people never play down there. They're always playing up here and that's it. Well, I think you could expand your knowledge a little just looking for these shapes. So another option we'd have is to play it here. I think that's enough, because the other one, it's the same, isn't it? I don't think we'd really need that ever. So it's the same, meaning that the tritone is exactly the same appearance. I've never seen anyone comping up this high, except for bass players. Electric bass players, when I think of bass players playing chords, immediately I think of Jaco Pastorius. He used to do that. He played a 4-string Fender, so it was tuned the same as the 4 strings of the guitar. So he can play the same sort of chords that we can play there. He could do this. The other thing we need to look at is just other chords like A7. We found an alternative for that. Or you'll keep seeing the same shapes, because it's, you know how the guitar is, we just move things up and down. So that's what's happening here also with chord shapes. And then we've got the B7 with the flat 13, which becomes, that's a nice one, that's the sharp 9. You can practice with the backing track. I've given you one with the keyboard and one without the keyboard. Without the keyboard is probably more fun, because you can do your own variations. So the next comping exercise is the slow blues in G, similar to Albert King. And this is using 4-note voicing. So it's giving us the opportunity to use 2 extensions. The basic chord is, as always, the shell voicing of the tritone, which is, in this case, the flat 7 and the major 3rd. As we probably are already familiar with, on the B string we can play a 13. But the 4th voice is something that's available to us on the E string on top. So we could do this, which is a 13 with a root note on top. And that sounds quite good. You could play a natural 9, which is an A. As I mentioned previously, we get our notes from the Mixolydian scale, first of all, because it has a natural 9 and a 13. In video number 5, we'll be doing more improvising using extensions like 9 and 13 and even beyond that. In this example, all chords are 2 beats long, and there's no long or short, they're all long. The second chord I wanted to play was G7 flat 13, so the E on the B string here goes down a half step to a flat 13. In bar 2, it moves to C7, and the available extension is the 9. And on the E string, that's the 5th, the G, or we could have played a 13, which is the A here on the 5th fret. And the second half of the second bar I've used the flat 9. And that's a diminished chord. That's very common chord shape, but it's functioning at the moment like C7 flat 9. Chords can have different functions just depending on what they are relative to the bass note. And here, we're not playing the bass note, we're not playing C, but if we did, it would be, that's the flat 9, you can hear that. Right, so bar 3, we go back to a G13, but this time with the A on top. And then we go up to a D7 sharp 9 flat 13. So that's a really cool chord. It's got a lot of tension in it. So G9 13 and D7 sharp 9 flat 13. But for us, we don't have to play the bass line. So for us, it's very easy to do something like that. It's just the same shape. Bar 4. The G7 gets a flat 13 and a flat 9. Why? Well, to make our voice leading interesting. You don't want to be playing the whole bar the same chord. That's not going to be very inspiring for the soloist. You can also, if you want, use fingerstyle. You don't always have to play all the voices at the same time. You can play and the secret weapon is sliding. A chord can go up, it can go down a half step, or even in another transcription I have given to you, in the Peter Green recording, the blues in A, that the guy comping would use things like this. So that's a triplet, ba, 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 without the first beat, so it's da, da, da. And that's quite effective, especially at slow tempi, because it's not hard to do, and it sounds more interesting than if you're just playing one chord. Bar 5, we've already seen that it goes to C7-9, and then that's the same thing we did in bar 3. It's just transposed now, so it becomes a C9, G7, sharp 9, flat 13, and then back to C, A flat 13 with a 9, it slides down. There's a thing that also is very important to understand, and it's called tritone substitution. Ooh, sounds really dangerous, doesn't it? So we just had a D7, remember? It was this. Now the tritone, as we know, is the 3rd and the 7. But you can reverse their functions. So if you're thinking A flat 7, same two notes, same tritone. But now, because of the bass note changing, it is now called A flat 7. And if you add extensions, of course, they have their names also. So 13, 9. It's a cool thing, tritone substitution. But we're not bass players, so we probably won't be actually actively doing this. If we play the bass line, we might play both notes, D and A flat. So we've got bar 7 now, we're back to the G13, and another one of those, it's a little different. So I'm starting to get a lot of jazz colours in this. It might be too much for some situations. There might be a blues soloist who wants to have the simplest chords you could have. In that case, just play the 3rd and the 7 all the time. Others might like the extensions that you find in jazz, like sharp 9, sharp 11. And I always see them as they're just on their way somewhere. Remember voice leading. The chord alone might seem out of place, but when you resolve it, it's quite logical. And then we've got a E flat 13. Same logic. E flat will go to a D. Bar 9, bar 10. That's called the turnaround. The last two bars. So the very last voicing, I've used a different structure. You see, that's the first one. That's quite common for us, quite well known. But this one is different because the tritone, the 3rd and the 7th, are not next to each other. There's a string in between. Here's F sharp and there's C. And then the note in the middle is a B flat, which is a flat 13. That's a note that's got some interesting tension. And on the top, that's an F, so that's the sharp 9. It's just a different way of voicing. You could even slide it down a half step when you go back to bar 1 and you've got G, 13. That worked well, I think, using the finger style, because it was a bit of a contrast to the organ, which was always playing long notes. Always look for a way to find your own place in a band. Doing the same thing as everybody else might be a solution, but there may be other solutions that make sense too. The next comping example is the blues in B flat, similar to B.B. King's 3 o'clock blues. I've turned off the organ, but of course in the download file you can choose between a blues backing with organ or without. And without organ, of course, we're a bit more free to try out things. So I'll be trying some slides and voice leading. Let's see what happens. When I was listening to the B.B. King recording from the organ player, I thought after a while that it was pretty lackluster, the comping. The organ player, I don't know who it was, he wasn't using any sort of extensions. Always playing dominant 7, like this. Just to compare the difference, this is the 13 and the 9. And I don't know why BB wanted it that way. Maybe he didn't. I think we can take a few risks as long as it serves the music. Don't worry about playing extensions, but always think about where are they going to go. Is it going to be a chromatic movement, up or down? That's usually the simplest way to resolve something. The next comping exercise is similar to Freddie King's Gone Down, blues in D, and it's funky. Well, that is what the organ was playing. There was no guitar comping in the original recording because Freddie, of course, he played his solos, but there was no other guitarist in the band playing chord because the organ was doing it. This is a mix of set things, like when you've got these triads. That happens 3 times during the 12-bar form. But the other chords, I think the rhythm that the organ player is playing just made up by him. He can do what he wants, but of course it has to be in a 16th groove. That's something that'd be a lot better if we could slow it down, and of course you can slow it down in transcribe, and I'm using Logic here and I can also slow it down. So that's 86. That's quite a lot slower, but the objective is to play tight. Now tight means together. So what we're hearing, of course, is just a programmed rhythm section, but it's based on 16ths. So that means each beat has 4 divisions. We hear it, of course, in the drums, the hi-hat. It is difficult to play tight unless you've practiced it. And that's why I think it's a good thing to use tools like this that make it fun to practice timing. Because in the old days, you just had a metronome. If you play along with the original recording, you have to keep up, and maybe that's not so easy. Let's just look at some different parts of the chord progression and see if we can lock on. The first thing we want is the very first bar. Here's the first bar, it's just D7. Okay, the rhythm is... The next comping exercise is based on Freddie King's Going Down, blues in D, and it's funky. Whew, that's quite a lot of playing. I've based this exercise on what the organ was playing, because there was no guitar comping. So I'm going to slow it down because it's really better to practice this sort of thing when the tempo is slower. So now it's 86. And what I also want to do is look at different parts of the form, because there are different things going on. Now, the first chord is that very common D7-9 chord that you'll find in a lot of soul and funk tunes, and also in blues, of course. And the organ is playing what I'd call a figure or a pattern. I'll just put on the backing track. A funky chord pattern like this uses particular accents. what we see here, you've got the PDF, you can see what's written. We have to digest it so that we're not reading. So what we're hearing, let's just listen to the drums by itself. And this is the pattern. Technically speaking, we've got alternate picking with the right hand, up and down, and the downbeats are down, one, and the offbeats, or the second and the fourth, 16th, are upstrokes. And that way, it helps us keep everything grooving. If we keep this rhythm, even if we're not playing all the notes. It's okay also to play ghost notes, so just as long as they're not too loud. Always remember that 16ths can be straight or they can be also shuffling. Da, 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 da. The best example I've heard of shuffling 16ths is Rosanna by Toto, and similar tunes like that. But anyway, here we've got straight 16ths. So each is da 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 da. And of course, in real life, a drummer would maybe swing it a little bit just to show that he can. He doesn't need to sound like a machine. The second bar is that pattern that actually comes from the melody of the tune. That's something that, as I said, it's played 3 times. So here it's easier to play because we're not playing 16th here, 8th notes. Here, if you're in a band with a keyboard player and you're wondering what to do, you might want to also follow the bass, just to give it a stronger sound. If there's no keyboard player, then of course we have to play the triads. Bar 3 and bar 4, this becomes quite complex because it's a 16th pattern stretched over 2 bars. Let's listen to it. What's happening here is the pattern is based on 3 16ths, which are then repeated. So you can see, if you're looking at the PDF, you can see there's always a rest after 2 of the 16ths. Da, 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 da. So it's a pattern that, as we say, doesn't resolve on the one of the next bar. It needs 2 bars. It's quite complex. So let's just listen again. It's very hard. I thought I'd give you something that you could spend a bit of time on. sometimes it's good to work on something. We've got here also barred up, long, short. It's always the same. Barred up, barred up, barred up, barred up. And to transfer that to our instrument, we do what's called upstroke, but we also, with the left hand, or whatever hand you use to actually finger the notes in the chord, you have to lift them up. Otherwise, you'll... I've done it so long, I just automatically lift the fingers. It's in sort of in my intuition to get that sound that you have to lift your fingers up. So it's not just the right hand. And the right hand is also dampening the strings. You don't want... Doesn't sound... The job here is to be able to play that pattern over 2 bars and not forget or not lose where the actual 1 is. This pattern is based on 3/16ths, which repeat over a period of 2 bars. So it does not emphasize the 1 of each bar. It doesn't do that. Bar 5 of the form is G9. That's played up here in the 9th position with our same chord that we had down here. And this pattern is only 1 bar long, and it uses a lot of off beats. So only the very first downstroke is on the beat. The rest are on the 2nd 16th and the 4th 16th, and then the next 2nd and the 4th. And then there's 2 beat rest. Oh, thank God for that. You can slide the chord if you want. You could fill up the space on the 3 and the 4. Here the pattern is only 1 bar long. So then we've got that triad thing again, so we don't need to talk about that. And then bar 7, lucky for us, it's the same as bar 3 and 4. We don't need to talk about that either. And then we've got the A13, bar 9. So that's a part of the pattern that was based on 3/16ths. Da 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 da. But it's only spread out over 2 beats, and the 3 and 4 are a rest, or you can play anything else you want. Bar 10 are the triads again, and bar 11 and 12, well, let's look at them. The pattern here is spread over 2 bars of D7, and it's got some space in it. That's nice, give us a bit of a rest. I must say this is probably one of the most difficult things to do if we're talking about comping a funky tune like this, because the original tempo is 110, so let's go back to that. You just got to play tight, and that needs a bit of work, because you have to be a bit like a machine to just keep going and try to blend in. Don't play too loud, and smile and enjoy yourself. The final example is a blues in A, similar to what was played by Peter Green. And here there was a guitar comping, so you could have a listen. I didn't really transcribe the guitar exactly, but we'll talk about it. I'll just play it for you, then we'll talk about some possibilities for the comping. So it's one of those blues comping patterns that we heard already today. 1 and 2 and it's a shuffle, of course. I like this tempo. It's very bright, 108. So the chords using a lot of 9s, 13s. And if you don't use extensions, this is what it would sound like. You should know how to play it without extensions, but I think it's benefiting from these extensions. Yeah. So that's something you can do, like the guitarist on the recording. Every now and then he's playing on the 4, ba ba ba. So 1, 2, 3, leading up to the chord that he has to go to. Just don't do it too much because it gets busy because you're filling in all of the spaces. Be careful with that sort of stuff. Okay, and then it becomes a lot of this sound, the D9, and back to A13, and then E9. And E, yeah. The 9 seems to be the chord of the day here. That's fine. It's a sweet sound, remember, that's in the Mixolydian scale, which is actually the major scale. So 9, 13. If you're a jazz musician, then you're aware of more scale possibilities, but I don't want to talk about that here because this is about blues. The remaining backing tracks that you'll find in the folder, I didn't want to go through every one of them. I think they're quite obvious, you know, if you have a blues in C, like Rory Gallagher played it, a slow blues, that it's very similar to the slow blues in B flat that B.B. King played, the same tempo also, 60 beats. There's, of course, different harmonic opportunities for us. Always remember that you have to play in the style. Blues can have different styles, as we can see. We've got the slow. We've even got a blues like Freddie King's, which is based on sixteenths, as is also Crossroads by Cream, Eric Clapton. That is blues in A, again, not like Peter Green, it's based on sixteenths. I didn't want to go through everything because I think you've got the idea. And if you do have questions, you can always contact me. See you in the next video.